Hi, thanks. Good afternoon. Unfortunately, we have made a decision as the Council of CEOs for the MEAC, which is a body made up of the presidents of the MEAC in consultation with the athletic directors to suspend the rest of the basketball tournament on both the men's and the women's side as of the end of the last women's game that was played. We've taken this decision out of an abundance of caution, given the circumstance surrounding the COVID-19 and the fact that the athletes are potentially at risk. They have to then return to the campuses, so we do have some concerns about that. We've also suspended spring sports for the rest of the spring semester, and we will also be suspending the bowling tournament that's supposed to take place in the next week or so. Again, all of this is done with the health and safety of the athletes in mind, recognizing that this is a very fluid situation and decisions are being made as we get more information. And that obviously today has changed significantly as well. So we'll continue to keep everyone updated about what we'll do. We'll be revisiting our decisions around suspending the spring sports as well. We have another CEO meeting tomorrow morning, and we'll try to make some more definitive decisions tomorrow. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, just raise your hands and we'll identify you for questions in the back.
So why did it take so long today to cancel? I know there was only one other women's game as well as like a partial game in the Big East.
Yeah.
It seems like you guys were kind of the last to pull the plug.
So our meeting started at 12:30 today. So actually the first game was actually going on while we were meeting. And the second game was about to start as we were taking the decision. We felt it would be unfair to the athletes to come down just a few minutes before the game and suspend the game at that point. So we thought it was prudent to allow the second game to be played and then put out the press release.
Any other
Wally Pittman, HBC Game Day. Is there a protocol for a champion if the NCAA tournament gets played?
Yeah, there's a protocol, and that protocol is that the regular season winner represents the conference at the tournament. And actually, I'll be quite frank with you, that's something that we will revisit as well, because obviously the number one seed in one of the brackets lost prior to us making this decision. So that's something that we'll revisit at an appropriate time.
Please be advised, the NCAA has canceled the men's and women's basketball championship.
Luke Williams from the Black House Sports Page. Dr. Frederick, as a medical doctor, how do you understand what is going on with this situation? And not only how does it affect athletics, but how does it affect your campus, for example?
Sure. And this is a very complicated situation. This virus, while we have experience with influenza, is very different. It's highly contagious. It has a different presentation depending on your age group and comorbidities. And as a result, I think as a country in general, we have to be very careful. And especially when you think of these athletes, these are young, very healthy people who may not present with any symptoms, but may become vectors, who may take this back to our campuses and give it to people who are potentially immunocompromised, like myself. I'm not in that age group where the mortality is significantly higher, above 65, but I have sickle cell. And I'm a type 1 diabetic, which means that I'm at risk. So apart from the hand washing, we have to practice significant social distancing in order to really contain the spread of the virus. And while the majority of people who contract the virus will survive, the significant mortality rate in the elderly is something that we have to look at. The second issue that quite frankly, I'm concerned about, not just on our campuses, but in our communities, is that we don't have a medical system that can quickly ramp up and expand itself. So we don't want to get into a situation which is taking place in Italy now, where we're making decisions about who should get care based on what we think their outcome would be, or for that matter, their value to society, especially not in our circumstance where those decisions may be made primarily around those who have access and money. So we have to be very careful that we don't stress the healthcare system. And then the third thing, when you think about athletics in particular, any injuries that are sustained now that require some semi-elective operation takes up resources in a healthcare system. And I just think we all have to be responsible. So if we can avoid putting the athletes in that circumstance where they may have injuries that then require an operation, et cetera, and then takes up medical resources, I think that we have a responsibility to not do that. So I think there's several layers to this. It's extremely complicated. I'm not sure that we've had enough information as a nation, but we do have a responsibility to be looking out for one another and to recognize that while the majority of people who contract this virus are not going to die from it, there are people who are at significant risk, who will die, and we could potentially as well really put a significant amount of stress on our medical resources as a nation. And I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we don't do that as well.
Steve.
Stephen Gator, HBCU Game Day. What was the tipping point last night? Commissioner Thomas said they didn't feel there was an imminent threat here in the Norfolk area, and then obviously 12 hours later we're sitting here.
Yeah.
What was the tipping point for you guys? Or?
The tipping point was, us assessing the fact that we have to move the students back so that while they themselves may not be at risk, and right now in Norfolk in particular, there doesn't seem to be a cluster, we have a responsibility to the broader communities that we serve. And so even if one athlete contracts this and takes us back to their campuses, that's something that we really needed to look at closely and also make sure that we did not contribute to. And I think that was the major tipping point.
And were you guys contacted by the NCAA? Did they put any pressure on you guys?
No, we were not. We were actively in our meeting when a lot of the press releases were coming out about Duke's decision, Kansas decision. We had already had a pretty fulsome discussion before any of that came out, and I'm aware that the NCAA Board of Governors had an emergency meeting at 3 o'clock. Our meeting started at 12:30, and our decision was made prior to that.
Doc, this is a follow-up, because they said that some of these tournaments were canceled because some of the teams had said they were not going to bring their teams to the tournament. I think Kansas said before the Big 12 canceled or before the ACC canceled. Did you have any of your schools that were saying to you that they did not want to come, anything like that?
Not here at the MEAC basketball tournament, but we certainly did have some schools that were already taking decisions around bowling next week and around their spring sports, and that certainly was a factor in the decision. Like I said, the couple of schools that made that decision early on, I think all of us were in the process of evaluating what we would do around spring sports. So I think it was a rich discussion, and I think it was also helpful to understand everyone's thinking, recognizing that we all have very different institutions with very different needs. At Howard we have a hospital, so I have a responsibility to a much wider community in the District of Columbia, so that I have to make sure that the medical resources that we supply for that community, that I don't put an unnecessary burden on it if I could avoid it. So anything that's semi-elective that I could avoid. I'm still a practicing surgical oncologist, so I'm not doing any elective operations until we get to a circumstance in this situation where we could all feel comfortable. Now, none of those decisions are going to be made in a vacuum because they have other repercussions. Hospitals are not going to meet their financial margins, et cetera. The wider economy is under stress, so this is really going to affect I think us as a nation much more deeply than I think we have a full appreciation for right now. So the discussions that the other schools were having, I think it was helpful for us to put all of that in context. And obviously with Howard having a hospital, I was able to give a different perspective as well in that discussion.
Are there any other questions? If not, Dr. Frederick, thank you for your time.
Good, and thanks everybody for coming out. I'm sorry, like I said, we would love to see our athletes after the months of preparation and so on. We'd love to put their excellence on display, but we do feel that we have a strong responsibility, not just to them, and our campuses, but the wider community at large. So I appreciate everybody's patience with the situation. Thank you.